Somebody was slapping me awake, and the whole world smelled like gasoline. Not a little gasoline, industrial quantities. Gasoline, engine oil, and the burnt metal stink of a welding torch, all funneled directly into my nose while several large hands shoved my shoulders and a voice yelled that my body was way too weak. I opened my eyes and immediately counted 4 enormous foreigners standing over me, and behind them a bald mountain of a man with arms like bridge cables and a gorgeous Latina leaning on his shoulder. My brain, still rebooting, produced exactly one thought at full volume. Holy crap, that's Leo and Chloe. I almost said it out loud. Almost introduced myself to the cast of Fast and Furious like a fan at a convention. Then the memories hit me like a second slap, and I understood 3 things very quickly. 1. My name was now Kenji Lee, 18 years old, Chinese-American, a mechanic in this very garage. 2. I had just been shoved headfirst into the concrete by the angry white wall of muscle currently glaring at me, a guy named Tony, because a girl talked to me. 3. I had died in my old world and transmigrated into a parallel universe where the Fast and Furious movies were just called Tuesday. The girl in question was Lena, Leo's little sister. Tony had been in love with her since roughly the invention of the wheel. She had rejected him roughly 50 times, and his solution to this math problem was to beat up every male under 30 who entered her orbit. My predecessor's crime was doing maintenance on her car while handsome. For this, he got shoved into the floor hard enough that his soul checked out and mine moved in. Rent-free, fully furnished, terrible neighborhood. Leo, to his credit, told Tony he went too far and offered to cover my medical bills. That's Leo for you. He'll let his best friend concuss the staff, but he'll pay for the ambulance like a gentleman. I told him I had a concussion and needed to go home. Technically true. My previous life had ended and I was inhabiting a corpse. If that's not a concussion, the word has no meaning. So there I went, wobbling out of the garage, 18 again, penniless, in a body whose parents had died and left him exactly one house he couldn't afford the inheritance tax on. America, baby. Even death has a processing fee. The previous owner had sold the house, rented a shoebox apartment, and bought a $700 motorcycle that was only slightly younger than he was. I straddled that rattling antique, turned the key, and the moment it coughed to life, a cold mechanical voice spoke inside my skull. Ding! Proficiency system activated. I nearly drove into a mailbox. The voice kept going, very calm about ruining my ability to operate a vehicle. Personal attribute panel unlocked. Private storage space unlocked. Host is currently driving, so a driving skill has been generated. 1 experience point per kilometer. Level up for generous rewards. Further features, please explore on your own. Please explore on your own. My golden sheet came with the customer support of a discount furniture store. No tutorial, no starter pack, just vibes and a to-do list. And you know what? I was thrilled anyway. I rode those 7 kilometers home listening to the system chirp driving experience +1, +1, +1, grinning inside my helmet like a lunatic because a man who died once and woke up with a video game in his head does not complain about the onboarding process. At my apartment door, I stuck the key in the lock and the voice came back. Ding! Lockpicking skill generated. I unlocked my own front door and the universe called it lockpicking. I wasn't going to argue. I ran inside, flopped on the couch, and yelled for my attribute panel like a kid summoning a genie. The panel was honest, and honesty hurt. Intelligence 9, where the global average is 10. Strength 7. Agility 8. Constitution 7. Endurance 7. The system had rated me below average in literally every category a human being can be measured in. My stats read like a report card you hide from your parents. But under all that shame sat one beautiful line. Attribute points can be freely assigned, and every skill level up pays 1 point plus 1 cubic meter of private storage. Every skill. Any skill. I tested the theory immediately. I picked up a couch cushion, thought about my storage space, and the cushion blinked out of existence into a 1 cubic meter pocket dimension only I could touch. I put in the cushion. I took out the cushion. I put in the previous owner's collection of adult magazines, which was extensive enough to qualify him for a library science degree. Everything worked. I sat there holding a cushion that had just returned from another dimension and felt my life plan assemble itself. Learn everything. Level everything. Become superhuman one chicken dinner at a time. Speaking of which, in the bedside drawer, I found the previous owner's other inheritance, a Colt M1911 with 2 loaded magazines and 3 boxes of ammo, because he was Chinese-American in Los Angeles and at the bottom of every list this country keeps. The gun went straight into my pocket dimension, first deposit in the world's most illegal checking account. Then I got hungry, and this is where the system revealed its true genius. I chopped an onion and the voice said, "Ding! Cooking skill generated." I stewed beef with canned tomatoes, and 40 minutes later, somebody knocked on my door. It was Lena, standing in my hallway with an apology on her face and absolutely no idea she was about to become a lab rat in a culinary experiment. She'd come to say sorry for Tony, which was already more than anyone else in that garage had done. I invited her in, fed her tomato beef, and the moment she said delicious, my skull chimed. Ding! Cooking gained 41 experience points. Very high rating. Interesting. Cooking for myself earned scraps. Cooking for a pretty girl who moaned about the flavor earned a jackpot. The system was many things, but it understood show business. And Lena talked. Oh, she talked. Between bites, she unloaded 18 years of grievance like she'd been saving it for the first person her own age who'd sit still. Her mother vanished before she could remember her. Her father died on a racetrack. Her brother raised her the way you'd raise a houseplant, watered with money and otherwise ignored, while his best friend Tony chased off every boy who bought a sandwich from her. She looked at me and said I was the man her age she'd talked to most in years, and it wasn't a compliment, it was a diagnosis of her entire life. I reached out and patted her hair before my brain approved the motion. She didn't pull away. Somewhere in my chest, a warm little problem started. The next 5 days, I disappeared into the grind, and the grind taught me the rules of my own cheat. Rule 1. Anything I did on purpose became a skill, and the lower the level, the faster it climbed. Reading unlocked when I flipped through the previous owner's magazine collection, and here's the joke the universe was determined to tell me at maximum volume. An entire adult magazine, cover to cover, earned exactly 1 point, while a single motorcycle repair manual earned dozens. The system had opinions about self-improvement, and it was not subtle. Mechanics unlocked wrenching on my bike. Swimming and running unlocked at the beach, because it turned out a man could get stronger and file it under exercise. Shooting the system labeled with a phrase I can only translate as American quick draw, may you stay safe, which is either a blessing or a threat, and in Los Angeles, it's both. 8 skills in 5 days. Every level up dropped 1 attribute point into my below average body like a coin into a very slow vending machine, plus 1 more cubic meter of pocket dimension, and I spent those first points carefully. 2 went straight into intelligence, because in my last life, I was the guy who peaked at a community college and spent 30 years regretting it, and this time, I was going to be smart on purpose. I felt it work too. Memories sharpened. Books that used to fight me laid down and behaved. My brain, for the first time ever, was an asset instead of a rumor. The problem was money, and money was the one skill I couldn't grind. Skills eat cash. Gasoline for driving, bullets for shooting, groceries for cooking, hardware store locks to practice picking. My total net worth was $20 I'd found ransacking my own dead body's apartment, and a credit card the previous owner had already run $2,000 into the ground. I had a cheat that could make me a god, and a bank balance that couldn't cover lunch. The world's most ambitious broke person. That was me, sitting on a pot of infinite potential with holes in my only pair of shoes. Lena came back on day 5. I answered the door shirtless because I just showered and wasn't expecting company, and 5 days of stat points had quietly redecorated my torso. She stood in the hallway and stared like a woman doing complicated math. I'd love to tell you I planned it. I did not plan it. But I also did not hurry to find a shirt because I'm a scholar, not a saint. I made her kung pao chicken, sweet the way Americans like it, sliced the heat down to almost nothing, and the system paid me 52 experience points for her happy noises. Then we talked, and this is the thing I keep coming back to about Lena. She had no one. A brother who bought her things instead of knowing her, a house full of rough men who'd watched her grow up and never once asked how she was. A lifetime of being the pretty problem everyone managed and no one listened to. So when a boy her own age fed her dinner and actually let her talk, she talked for an hour without noticing the clock. And neither did I. And somewhere in there, the arithmetic in my head went quiet again, which around Lena it kept doing. Then her phone rang, Leo on the other end demanding she come home, and her whole face shut like a garage door coming down. She hung up with the light gone out of her. It was nearly night. Her car wouldn't start in my parking lot, just buzzed at us like a dying wasp, so I told her I'd fix it tomorrow and drove her home myself. One girl on the back of one geriatric motorcycle, her arms around my waist, 20 kilometers of Los Angeles night ahead of us. 10 kilometers in, the night grew engines. I heard them before I saw them. Then the mirror filled with headlights, dozens of them, a rolling thunderstorm of Harleys, and Lena's voice went tight against my ear. Hell's Angels, find a side street, get away from them. The lead rider pulled up alongside us, a bearded slab on a bike worth more than my building, and shared his thoughts on my girlfriend's taste in men, my skin color, and what his club could offer her instead. Real Renaissance man. Lena's whole body was shaking with anger behind me. I did the opposite of everything she asked. Side streets were their home field. The interstate had speed traps and patrol cars, and cops are the natural predator of the biker gang. So I told her to hold on tight, and I fed that ancient motorcycle everything it had. Level 3 driving turned out to mean something. The bike and I had an understanding now. I could hear its condition in the engine note and feel the exact edge where grip ended. So I threaded us through midnight traffic at 140 while a maniac on a Dodge Tomahawk tried to grind me into the guardrail. That thing costs as much as a house and weighs as much as a cow. He was faster in a straight line. I was faster everywhere else. We danced like that for 20 kilometers, him screaming promises, me overtaking cars so close I could have checked their mirrors for spinach in my teeth, until an exit appeared and I cut behind a truck and dropped off the interstate like a coin through a grate. The convoy roared past overhead, trapped by traffic, gone. Lena didn't lift her head from my back for another 10 minutes. When I finally dropped her off, she pulled off the helmet, stood on her toes, and kissed my cheek. "What an exciting experience," she said, and walked away with a blush I could see by streetlight. I touched my cheek like an idiot. Somewhere in the original script, this girl was supposed to end up with an undercover cop named Ryan. I stroked the handlebars of my war veteran motorcycle and offered the man my condolences. Her car, by the way, had a loose battery cable. 30 seconds of work. I did not deliver the car back to her house because if the car was at my garage, she had a reason to come to me, and I had exactly one romantic strategy, and it was logistics. Then the garage went quiet on me. Lena vanished for 4 days. Leo's whole crew brought their cars in for full service and fresh paint, all at once, which for a normal racing team means spring cleaning, and for Leo's team meant we just robbed another truck and need new fingerprints for the cars. Sure enough, the newspaper confirmed it that week. Highway hijackers strike again. 2 trucks, $6 million in electronics. My employers, ladies and gentlemen. That's when old Thompson waddled over, and old Thompson became my first income stream. Thompson ran the garage, 50-something, retired racer, built like a beanbag chair, and he had a side business the IRS was not aware of. He'd been quietly watching my wrench skills go from apprentice to alarming in a single week, and one evening, after everyone left, he stopped me at the door. "Word your mouth stays shut," he said, "and there's cash in it." I told him keeping my mouth shut was the one thing I was genuinely good at, which was true, because my predecessor had died friendless, and I'd known this world for 10 days. If I wanted to brag, I couldn't have found an audience. The first job was a warehouse by the port with a tarp in the middle of it, and under the tarp, a Porsche 911, brand new, 90% perfect, no plates, one door lock punched out. A stolen supercar, and my task was to reduce it to a pile of untraceable parts before noon and toss the warehouse key back through a high window on my way out. $500, which even I could tell was a robbery on top of a robbery. I complained about the pay to the empty warehouse the entire time and took that beautiful machine apart like a Thanksgiving turkey. Seats out, tires off, engine cracked open, and the system rained mechanics experience on me the whole way. A Porsche is a complicated animal, and complicated pays. By the time I finished, mechanics hit level 3, and my whole stat page lit up. All 5 physical attributes sitting at 10. Average. Perfectly, gloriously average, and I celebrated like I'd medaled at the Olympics, which tells you everything about where I'd started. More jobs followed, because Thompson had discovered a mechanic who worked all night and never asked questions, and to him, I was a gift from God. 2 more stolen cars, dissected in dark warehouses. Then a stranger job. Thompson took me to a bar so quiet it seemed to lose money on purpose. A bartender who looked like he was memorizing my face for a police sketch slid a folded note and a key across the counter. Thompson read the note, burned it with a lighter, and drove us to a warehouse with 3 cars in it. The client wanted them modified with, and I quote, "engines that never stall at the critical moment, bodies that take a hit, glass nobody can see through, $15,000 for the set." I quoted a week, delivered in a week, and tried very hard not to think about what a critical moment meant to people who order bulletproof getaway sedans in bulk. Whatever these people were planning, it was going to be loud and violent and completely not my business. My business was that mechanics hit level 4, my pocket dimension grew to 15 cubic meters, big enough to swallow my entire motorcycle whole, and I now walked around with a vehicle hidden in my metaphysical pants at all times. You never know when you'll need to make a bike appear out of nowhere. Spoiler, you need it constantly. Lena finally came back on a morning I answered the door in even less than no shirt because I sleep like a man with no roommates and forgot I'd have visitors. She turned the color of brake lights. I got dressed at a speed that unlocked no skill but should have and made her breakfast burritos, and she stayed. We went to the beach that day. Swimming, jet skis, a barbecue, sunscreen applied with more ceremony than sunscreen strictly requires, and a fishing rod that dinged me a whole new fishing skill and 2 actual fish. She drove me home. She helped carry the cooler up, and at the moment she turned to leave, I caught her hand, and neither of us said anything worth quoting, and she stayed the night. I'll keep the rest between us. What I'll tell you is that in the morning she called me a monster in the tone women use when it's a compliment, warned me that Leo would kill me, corrected herself, no, Tony would kill me, and drove off to hide at Chloe's place like a teenager sneaking home after curfew, which she was. 18, technically an adult, emotionally a jailbreak in progress. And me? I went to a boxing gym, because Tony was coming. That was as certain as sunrise, and I had a theory I wanted to test. I'd suspected for a while that fighting itself would trigger a skill if I could just find the right doorway into it, and paying a professional to hit me seemed like the fastest doorway available. So I handed a retired heavyweight named Frank $200 an hour, and the instant I put on the gloves and threw my first punch, the system chimed. Ding! Boxing skill generated. Theory confirmed. Money is a skill accelerant, and I had just discovered I could buy expertise by the hour. Frank was a mountain, 110 kilos of trained muscle, and he took one look at my lean frame and assumed I was a rich kid burning cash on a hobby. 3 hours later, he'd stopped assuming anything. He watched a bamboo pole absorb his technique and give it back cleaner every round, and somewhere in there he offered to turn me pro, which I declined, because a career in getting punched in the face on camera did not fit my 5-year plan. His entire philosophy fit in one sentence, and it was the best $200 I ever spent. There will always be someone bigger and stronger than you, so learn where the switches are. The jaw, the bridge of the nose, the temple. Hit any one of those clean and the fight is over, regardless of size. A poet, that man, in the way only violent men get to be poets. Then I drove to a range and fed 700 rounds downrange until shooting hit level 3, and by the time I rode home that evening, I was the most heavily and illegally educated 18-year-old in the state of California. Tony was waiting in my parking lot. He came at me like a vending machine falling downstairs, all mass and noise, screaming slurs with the creativity of a man who owned one book and had colored in it. He grabbed for my collar. I stepped back half a pace and his hand closed on air. He swung. I caught his fist out of the air and squeezed, and I felt his knuckles grind together like gravel, and I watched his entire worldview reboot in real time. Big man, little garage rat, wrong script. Is that all? I asked him. He swung with the other hand. I moved my head the polite minimum, then broke his nose with a right hand that Frank would have framed and hung on the gym wall. Blood, snot, and tears left his face in one combined exodus. He folded. And I am not going to pretend I stopped there, because I didn't. This was the man who killed my predecessor, the man who had spent years terrorizing a teenage girl for the crime of not loving him, and I kicked him while he was down until the count of broken things in his body hit double digits. 17 fractures, the hospital said later. Then I fished out his phone with gloves on, called 911 in a falsetto, and went upstairs to watch the ambulance from my balcony like it was community theater. Some people count sheep to relax. I counted sirens. The problem with beating Leo's best friend half to death is that Leo has other friends. 3 days later, my front door came off its hinges at 8 in the morning, and 3 large men filed into my apartment carrying a baseball bat, a knife, and the unearned confidence of people who hadn't spoken to Tony's doctors. Their leader was a guy named Spike. I recognized him from the garage. He pointed at me and yelled, "Break his arms and legs first," which points for a clear agenda. I threw my couch at him. I want to be precise about this because it was a beautiful moment. A full couch, 50 kilos of furniture, traveling across my living room like the world's ugliest comet, and it hit the guy with the bat so hard his arm bent in a direction arms don't have. The knife guy came next, and I kicked his own friend into him. Spike got 2 punches and a nap. When the dust settled, I broke 1 arm and 1 leg on each of them. Sounds harsh, until you remember their to-do list had my name on it with the same 2 items. Then I tied them with rope from my pocket dimension and called old Thompson instead of the police. Thompson showed up, looked at the wreckage, looked at the 3 groaning men, looked at me, and aged visibly. I told him to pass Leo a message. My parents are dead, I have no one to mourn and nothing to lose. I gave Lena's face 2 free passes, and there will not be a third. Thompson paid me $30,000 in severance, told the wounded they were lucky to be alive, and quietly kept my phone number, because whatever else I was the best mechanic he'd ever laundered money with. I moved out that afternoon. New neighborhood next to Chinatown, 6th floor of a quiet building full of retirees and immigrants. And as I discovered on the stairwell, one chain-smoking 12-year-old named Beatrice, whose face I recognized from a movie about a hitman, which meant the silent man in apartment 6D, the one with the little round glasses and the single-potted plant, was exactly who I thought he was. I stood in my new hallway and did the math. This world had Leo's crew in it. It also had Gene the Professional, which meant it wasn't one movie universe, it was all of them. Every heist film, every hitman flick, every thriller I'd ever watched at 2 in the morning in my old life, stitched into one Los Angeles, and me in the middle of it, with a system that turned practice into superpowers and a pocket dimension full of guns. I made myself dinner and laughed at the stove until the neighbors banged on the wall. Somewhere out there, this city was full of movie money that belonged to movie villains, and I was the only man alive who'd read the scripts. The first script walked into my life through a Burger King. Old Thompson had a client who wanted a modification specialist and insisted on meeting face-to-face, which in the illegal car business is like insisting on exchanging home addresses before a drug deal. Nobody agreed to it. Nobody except a broke teenager with a leveling addiction. So there I sat at table 11, working through a Big Mac, when a short middle-aged white man slid into the seat across from me and my chewing stopped mid-bite. I knew that face. Not from this life. From a movie called The Italian Job, where this exact man led a crew that stole a ton of gold bricks from the mafia in Venice and then got betrayed by one of his own. He introduced himself as Arthur Finch, and inside my head, fireworks went off. It really was all of them. Every movie, one city. Arthur's job was a Dodge Ram van that needed 600 horsepower, blackout windows, a rack of electronics, and the ability to carry 1 extra ton of cargo. 1 ton. I looked at this man, remembered exactly what in his movie weighed 1 ton, and quoted him a price while my heart tried to escape through my ribs. Somewhere in Los Angeles, right now, sat the traitor Greg, and in Greg's house sat the gold. $30-something million of stolen mafia gold that no police report would ever mention because the only people who knew it existed were thieves. Untraceable money. The exact food group my system diet required. I did the van in one night for an extra $5 grand. I also met Arthur's hacker, Kevin, a shut-in genius who claimed to have invented Napster and opened every conversation with that fact. I made friends with him on purpose. In a world full of movie characters, befriending the hacker is just basic hygiene. And while Arthur's crew ran their slow, careful, professional surveillance on Greg, I made a private decision that would have hurt their feelings terribly. I was going to rob their robbery. But first, the plot came looking for me. I walked into an auto parts store for motorcycle parts, and the manager called out a name that froze my spine. "Ryan, take the customer to aisle B4. And there he was. Blonde, handsome, friendly. Ryan Fitzgerald, the undercover fed sent to infiltrate Leo's crew through the traditional method of dating Lena. In the movie, it worked. In my world, Lena's dating schedule was fully booked, and I intended to keep it that way through the aggressive use of counterintelligence. That night, I called Lena, heard Leo breathing on the speakerphone like a suspicious refrigerator, and delivered my performance. Someone's been following me. Two men claiming to be FBI asked me strange questions about your brother and his cars. Tell him to be careful. The breathing on the phone got heavier. Ding, said the system. Acting skill generated. Even my cheat was laughing at me. Leo didn't act careful. Leo sold one more load of stolen goods, nearly got Chloe arrested when the black market buyer turned out to be crawling with cops, and suddenly my anonymous warning looked like prophecy. So when I knocked on his door a week later and offered a trade, he let me in. My offer was simple. I'd been following the man who was following him. I had a name, Ryan Fitzgerald, a workplace, and within 2 days, photographs of the man walking into the FBI field office, shot on a little camera with my very best telephoto lens and pettiness. In exchange, I wanted Leo to use his underworld contacts to find one address for me, a locksmith. A woman named Sarah Jensen. Leo looked through the photos of his future betrayer, and the veins on the back of his hand stood up like tree roots. Then he did something I did not see coming. He walked to the wall, took down a set of keys, and tossed them to me. A fourth-generation Ford Mustang, the coupe, modified by Leo himself to somewhere north of $100,000 in parts. Consider it an advance, he said. Keep watching that cop for me, and stay away from Lena for a while. 2 out of 3, Leo. 2 out of 3. Now, Sarah Jensen. Let me explain her because she matters. Her father was Paul Jensen, the greatest safecracker who ever lived, Arthur Finch's mentor, murdered by the traitor Greg during the Venice job. Sarah inherited the talent, all of it, maybe more, and did the one thing nobody in her family had ever done. She went legal. She ran a locksmith company in downtown Los Angeles that banks and police departments hired when a vault said no. The best lockpicking teacher on planet Earth, in other words, and my lockpicking skill was sitting at a shameful level 2, opening bicycle locks and feeling proud. I found her company. I watched her leave in a Mini Cooper, blonde and severe and beautiful in a way that suggested icebergs. And then I followed her, because wherever Sarah went in her off hours, Arthur Finch eventually appeared, and wherever Arthur Finch went, he was scouting Greg. 4 days of tailing, wig on, makeup on, my disguise skill leveling like a weed, and on day 4 the whole parade led me up into the hills northwest of the city, to a fortress pretending to be a villa. Greg's place. High walls crowned with electrified wire, cameras, a guard post at the gate, paid security patrolling the grounds, and 2 American bully dogs roaming the yard with the customer service attitude of loan sharks. Every approach covered. Except one. Behind the villa, the wall just stopped, because behind the villa was a cliff. 50 meters of near-vertical rock falling into brush, and Greg had looked at that cliff and decided no one alive would climb it in the dark. He was almost right. No one alive would. But I had a system that turned 2 weeks of obsession into a level 3 climbing skill, and a plan so stupid it circled back around to elegant. I spent those 2 weeks becoming a different person, on purpose, one skill at a time, climbing lessons with a professional coach at an indoor gym, then nights alone on the sea cliffs south of the city, learning wet rock in the dark until my fingers bled and healed and stopped bleeding. Shooting hours, disguise practice with a makeup mirror until I could pass myself on the street. I tailed Sarah under 3 different faces and never got made, which told me both that my disguise skill was climbing and that the greatest lockpicker alive was, at least, not the greatest spotter of tails. My 5 attributes crossed twice the human average that month, one grinded point at a time, and every point paid a little dividend I could feel. Sharper eyes, quicker recovery, a memory that had started catching everything it saw, and my private pocket passed 70 cubic meters. If that number sounds boring to you, hold it in your mind for later, because it's the whole trick, the entire secret of my criminal career, and every genius in this city was about to be undone by it without ever knowing it existed. 70 cubic meters, remember it. Then came the night. Rain, just hard enough to blur the cameras and drown small sounds. I stood at the bottom of Greg's cliff with a hammer wrapped in cotton cloth and spent 7 hours driving climbing pitons into 50 meters of wet rock, in the dark, one nail at a time, building myself a ladder to $30 million. I finished as the sky went gray, rappelled down, tested the whole line once, rode home, and slept like a man with a very big Tuesday coming. Tuesday came. Arthur Finch himself called me that evening, wanting more cars modified, and I nearly laughed into the phone. His heist was still in the planning phase. Mine was tonight. I told him we'd meet tomorrow at noon, hung up, and rode into the hills. The climb took 10 minutes, piton to piton, fingers finding steel in the dark, the rope trailing from my harness for the exit I'd already rigged. At the top I lay flat in the wet grass and studied the back of the villa, 2 cameras sweeping the rear. I clocked their rhythm, counted, and crossed the dead ground between sweeps like a cat crossing a kitchen. A basement window stood open for ventilation, and basements don't get windows barred when the architect assumes the cliff is doing the security. I poured myself through the gap, hung from the sill, and dropped 3 meters into Greg's garage, landing between a Bentley and an armored Jeep. The house was dark and rich and wrong. Old European floors, imported antiques, the taste of a man who'd bought culture by the pallet. I picked the interior door, slipped through the ground floor room by room, and found nothing until the only locked door in the hallway by the living room. Small room, maybe 4 square meters. I picked that lock too, swung the door open, and my breathing forgot its job. 2 safes. Worthington 1000s, the flagship, each one taller than me, 1.6 tons of carbon titanium alloy, with 3 separate locking systems and a factory brochure that bragged it was second only to a bank vault. 2 of them, side by side, packed with everything Greg had in this world. And above the door, a camera I hadn't seen from outside, staring straight at me with its little red thought. No time. I'd worn the mask, I'd worn the makeup, and the plan had never been subtle past this point anyway. I yanked up my sleeve, pressed my bare forearm against the first safe, and thought the word that made my whole criminal career possible. Store. 1.6 tons of the world's finest private safe vanished from the floor of Greg's house into my pocket. Here's what the brochure didn't cover. The Worthington 1000 can survive drills, torches, explosives, and lockpicks. It cannot survive a transmigrator with a 70 cubic meter hole in reality, because no engineer on Earth was asked to design against theft by physically impossible means. I touched the second safe. Store. Gone. 4 tons of security, gone in 4 seconds, and the only trace left was the pressure plate under the first safe rising gently off the floor, freed of its burden, and screaming. The alarm hit the house like a fire drill in hell. I ran. Behind me, boots on stairs, Greg's voice roaring, and then the entire ground floor started armoring itself, steel shutters dropping over windows, an alloy gate sliding across the front door, the whole villa transforming into a very expensive box with me inside it. Except I hadn't come in through a door, and I wasn't leaving through one. I dove down the basement stairs as automatic fire chewed the door frame over my head, and let me tell you, the sound of an AK in an enclosed space really clarifies your priorities. I crossed the garage in 4 strides, jumped, caught the ventilation window, and squirted through it into the rain as boots hit the basement floor behind me. Then the dogs found me. 2 American bullies, moving like furry torpedoes, closing across the lawn while I sprinted for the cliff edge with 4 tons of stolen safe in my metaphysical pants. I reached the rope, clipped in one-handed, and the first dog left the ground with its mouth open at exactly the moment my other hand came out of my pocket holding the Colt. 2 shots. I'm not proud of it, I like dogs, but those dogs did not extend me the same courtesy, and a bite meant my blood and my DNA left at the scene. The second dog sailed past my shoulder and off the cliff on pure momentum, which felt like the universe filing its own paperwork. Floodlights swung toward me, security shouting. And then Greg himself came around the villa with his rifle up, screaming, "Take him alive!" And I gave the whole assembly a small bow, stepped backward off a 50-meter cliff, and dropped into the dark with the rope singing through my rig. The ground came up fast. I unclipped, ran flat out, and pulled my motorcycle out of thin air mid-stride, which I'd like to see a getaway driver top. Behind and above, engines were already screaming down the mountain road. 2 riders on fast bikes, with a man on a walkie-talkie promising $100 grand to whoever caught me. The chase lasted 20 minutes on the interstate. It was not close. Level 4 driving against angry employees is a rigged contest, and I crossed 200 kilometers an hour, weaving through midnight traffic, while their headlights shrank in my mirrors like dying stars. Then a lane change behind a truck, an exit ramp, a costume change in an alley, and the last leg home, driven at a law-abiding crawl in a Ford Mustang, radio on, pulse, slowly remembering its factory settings. In my apartment, with the curtains drawn, I took out safe number 1 and set it on my poor, groaning floorboards, and I sat in front of it the way early humans sat in front of fire. I couldn't open it. 3 locking systems, a custom key, a mechanical combination, a digital keypad with iris verification. My level 2 lockpicking looked at that safe the way a house cat looks at a bank. $30+ million, mine, in my pocket, and locked tighter than the meaning of life. I started laughing and couldn't stop, because I knew exactly one human being on Earth who could teach me to open it, and Greg was about to hand her to me. Meanwhile, up in the hills, Greg was losing his mind, and, honestly, fair. Put yourself in his shoes. You're a traitor living alone in a fortress, guarding the gold you murdered a friend for. One rainy night your alarm screams, you run downstairs with a rifle, and both of your 1.6-ton safes are simply gone. Not cracked, not dragged. Gone, like the room had never contained furniture, while the only intruder you saw was one masked man on foot who jumped off a cliff. His men searched the villa. They searched the grounds. They dug through the hillside brush, expecting to find 2 safes the weight of a car hidden under a shrub, because the alternative was believing in magic, and Greg was not ready for that conversation. Then his people pulled the security company's camera footage from the surrounding streets, and there, in the recordings from the past month, they found familiar faces doing surveillance. Arthur Finch, Jack, Sarah. And just like that, Greg knew who robbed him, and he was completely wrong, and it was the funniest thing I never got to tell anyone. The man went to war against the wrong enemy, and I have to give him credit, he reasoned his way to it beautifully from a foundation of pure wrong. He remembered that the mentor he'd murdered in Venice, Paul Jensen, had a daughter with the same impossible gift. He remembered Paul mentioning she worked in Los Angeles. and he remembered that a Worthington 1000 is not a safe a normal thief opens, which meant Arthur's crew must have added a world-class lockworker, which meant Paul's daughter, which meant a woman with a storefront and her name on the door. His first move was vicious. He couldn't touch Arthur's crew, they were ghosts by trade. But Sarah was findable, and Greg found her. 3 days after my heist, big men in suits pulled up beside her on the sidewalk outside her own apartment, showed her a gun, and folded her into a car. By the time Arthur Finch's flowers and longing courtship noticed she'd stopped answering, Greg had her tied to a chair in his dining room, watching him eat, going 2 full days without food while he asked her, over and over, how her crew had made 4 tons of steel evaporate from his house. She had no idea. She'd been planning to help rob him, sure, but the plan hadn't even started, and the robbery had already happened, which from her side made Greg sound completely insane. She wasn't wrong about the insane part, she just had the cause wrong, same as him. Because the actual answer was a teenager with a hole in reality, and that was not a theory available to anyone in that room. I found out because I went to her company to apply for a job, like a normal stalker, and got told she hadn't shown up. Checked her apartment, mailbox stuffed, car cold. I put it together with the speed of a man who'd seen this movie. Then I did the math that shames me a little. Sarah in Greg's hands was a hostage. Sarah dead, was my lockpicking education canceled, and Sarah rescued by a mysterious stranger at night from a fortress was a woman with every reason in the world to teach me anything I asked. I never claimed to be a good person. I claimed to be an effective one. I went back to Leo's. He answered the door with less hostility than last time, which for Leo counts as a warm embrace, and I told him a friend of mine had gang trouble, and I needed to borrow something with range and quiet. He looked at me for a long moment with that flat, unreadable face, decided that a man who'd bailed him out and beaten Tony half to death could be trusted with hardware, and led me around back into a storm cellar with a false wall. Of course, Leo's tornado shelter had a false wall. Behind it hung a private arsenal that would embarrass a small country. Berettas, a python, shotguns, an assault rifle, grenades, and one beautiful anachronism. A sniper Leica, a military special forces crossbow with an infrared scope, alloy bolts that punch through elephant hide and shatter bone, silent as a held breath, effective to 300 meters, more useful than a rifle and exactly the kind of night I had planned. Leo had won it off a friend years ago, played with it once on a hunting trip, and preferred old rifles. He watched me pass over the guns and lift the medieval option off his wall, thought about it, and said, keep it. Then he watched me also pocket 2 hand grenades, and he did not say keep those, but he didn't stop me either, and that silence, from Leo, is what friendship sounds like. Be careful, he said, which was the most sentimental thing I ever heard the man say. That night, Arthur Finch got a phone call from Greg. Bring back what you stole from me within 24 hours or collect Sarah in a bag. Arthur, who had stolen nothing, did what desperate honest thieves do. He built a fake. A whole car trunk of counterfeit gold bricks stamped with the Parisian dancer, strapped a bomb vest to his chest, and drove up to Greg's gate alone to trade himself into a standoff. He didn't know I was already in the tree. 100 meters out from the villa, up in the branches with the crossbow, I'd been waiting for 2 hours with the infrared scope on the one object in that compound I actually cared about, the electrical box. Greg's whole fortress ran on it, the floodlights, the cameras, the electrified wall. Arthur rolled through the gate. Greg came out flanked by gunmen. Voices rose, the bomb vest came out, everyone pointed guns at everyone in that special Mexican standoff pitch. And at the exact moment every eyeball in the compound was locked on the bomb, I exhaled and put an alloy bolt through the electrical box. The villa went black like God flipped a switch. Then everything happened at once. Panicked gunfire, Greg screaming orders, Arthur taking a bullet somewhere in the chaos and going down. And me, dropping out of my tree, sprinting downhill, going over the dead wall with bolt cutters through the powerless wire, and hitting the back of the villa while every armed man on the property ran toward the fireworks out front. Window, breaker hammer from my pocket, one swing, one waterfall of glass, and I was inside a dark house I'd already burgled once, which is a strange kind of homecoming. 2 of Greg's men were stationed in the dining room with Sarah. I heard them before they heard me, threw a rock from my pocket dimension into the far corner, and when the first one lunged at the sound, I fired 3 times. The second sprayed a whole Uzi magazine at my muzzle flash while I lay flat behind an antique cabinet, counting his shots like sheep, and when he ran dry on round 32, I stood up and finished the argument. Sarah was tied to a chair, gagged, filthy, half-starved, glaring at the whole world with the fury of a cat in a bathtub. I told her I was there to rescue her, and she had exactly 0 seconds of questions available. Then I picked her up, chair and all, and ran out the broken window into the dark, with headlights swinging across the lawn behind us, and Greg somewhere back there discovering his hostage had evaporated in the same impossible way as his savings. At the cliff edge, I cut her loose, buckled her into my harness, and only then did his men spot us and open fire, tracers whipping past into the void. I checked my pitons, because Greg, that beautiful paranoid snake, had loosened them after my last visit, hoping I'd come back the same way and discover gravity. I hammered the anchor tight, grabbed the woman, and jumped. We dropped 50 meters in bounding falls while she held onto me with her arms, her legs, and, I believe at one point, her teeth. At the bottom, I summoned the motorcycle out of nowhere, and she was too far past surprise to comment. We were on the highway doing 150 before her heartbeat came down out of the treetops. Behind us, the night lit up, and I only learned the details later, secondhand, from letters and gossip. When the lights died and the shooting started, Arthur took a bullet in the chaos and went down. But the man was in love, and love makes people stupid and brave in equal measure. So even shot, he crawled into the dark villa to find Sarah, and found her already gone. Jack charged the gates to save Arthur and caught a bullet of his own. Red-Eye, watching it all fall apart on the comms, floored a car straight through the front of the villa and dragged both wounded men out through the wreckage with homemade explosives going off behind them. They escaped barely, their leader shot 8 times and dazed from death, with no gold, no fake gold, and no idea what had happened. And the whole rich mountain was calling the police about explosions. So Greg, in the confusion, grabbed the trunk of counterfeit bricks and drove off into the night, wanted, hunted, and about to discover his ransom was fake. Arthur Finch's crew lost that battle. Greg lost that battle. Greg's men went to jail. 2 dogs died, and I still feel bad about the dogs. Everyone on that mountain lost, and the only winner was a teenager on a motorcycle with a starving safecracker on the back, and I hadn't even been invited to the party. I took Sarah to a motel, rented 1 room over her objection, explained the objection away with the observation that a lone, beautiful woman in a highway motel is a want ad, and gave her the bed while I took the couch. Somewhere around midnight, fed and showered and human again, she asked me the reasonable questions. Who are you? Why did you save me? I told her a story that was 90% true, which is my favorite blend. My name, real. My status as a thief, real. My confession, that I was the one who stole Greg's gold before Arthur's crew could, absolutely real. And her eyes went wide as dinner plates, because from her side of the story, some anonymous phantom had outplayed the greatest thief she knew, and the phantom was a polite teenager who cooked. And the last piece, the hook. I'd been watching her, I said, because she and her father were the finest lockworkers alive, and I would trade anything to learn. She looked at me for a long moment, this woman whose whole life was locked doors. Then she said, my father had a farm. The farm was 2 hours out of the city, weeds to the waist, a barn full of dusty workbenches, shelf after shelf of locks, practice safes under tarps, the whole training ground where Paul Jensen had raised a prodigy. Sarah walked through it, touching things like they were photographs. He wanted to retire here, she said, plant corn, keep horses. Then he took one last job for an old friend, and a man named Greg shot him and left him floating in a canal in Venice. I said, teach me to open locks, and I'll kill Greg for you. She said no. She was raised right. She believed in courts and consequences. But she didn't say it fast, and we both heard the pause. And then she picked up her father's tools and started my first lesson. 9 days. That's what it took, and I want you to understand what 9 days means here, because it's the cruelest thing my cheat ever did to another human being. Sarah had trained her entire life. 6 years old, she could open a hardware store lock in 10 seconds. She'd spent 20 years absorbing everything her father knew, and then surpassing it against the vaults of banks and police departments. And there is no exaggeration in calling her the finest safecracker alive. She started me at the bottom, a boy who could barely tease open a common deadbolt with a tension wrench, and she was patient and precise and generous with the one thing she had that money can't buy, which is judgment earned by feel. And every hour of that judgment poured directly into my system like water into a bucket with no bottom. Lockpicking climbed from level 2 to 3, 3 to 4, the experience arriving faster the lower the level, exactly as the system liked. She watched me go from clumsy to competent to smooth in a matter of days. Somewhere around day 6, I saw the first crack in her. The moment a master realizes the student isn't just learning, he's accelerating past the place it took her a whole lifetime to reach. On day 9, she set a safe in front of me from the top 20 list of the hardest private models ever built, one that needed her 90 full seconds and rented equipment and total silence, and she watched me open it cold, by feel, in 40. Then she went very quiet, and I watched her rearrange her entire understanding of her own gift, of the talent her father swore no one would ever beat. There was pride in it, and grief, and something that wasn't quite jealousy, all at once. I felt bad, genuinely, and it didn't slow me down at all. Lockpicking level 5. The system flooded my head with the structure, material, and weakness of every lock humanity had ever built, a parts catalog for the entire concept of security. And I knew in my bones that no vault on Earth would ever be a wall to me again, only a delay measured in minutes. Somewhere in my storage, 2 Worthington 1000s stopped being an impossible problem. They downgraded to an errand. On the 10th morning, Sarah wanted to go back to the city. I went first, alone, to check whether it was safe, and it wasn't, but not for her. Greg had gone feral. His villa was seized and sealed, his men were in jail from the explosion night, his fortune was in my pants, and he'd stopped hiding and started hunting. I found him staked out across the street from Sarah's apartment with a week of beard and a pistol, waiting for the one person he could still reach to punish. He never registered the man in a hat 200 meters away on an apartment rooftop. The sniper Leica made a sound like a heavy book closing, and Greg sat down against a tree with an alloy bolt through his chest, looked at the world with enormous surprise, and stopped being anyone's problem. I photographed him where he sat, not for me. That night, back back at the farm, I handed Sarah the camera without a word, and she looked at the picture of her father's murderer for a long, long time, and something 12 months old finally let go of her shoulders. She cried like a locksmith, quietly, everything held except the tears. A life for a life, I told her. Where I come from, some deaths get paid in person. I stayed at the farm that night, and this part is hers and mine, so all you get is the morning after. I woke to an engine sound, and by the time I reached the window, my Ford Mustang was rolling out of the farm gate with a blonde safecracker at the wheel, fleeing her own feelings at highway speed, having stolen my car keys off the wall as a souvenir. Greatest lockpicker alive. Didn't even need the keys. Took them anyway. Women. While Sarah ran off with my car and my heart in a jar, I still had a job to finish, and this one paid $600,000. But to explain the job, I have to back up, because in the middle of all this, Leo got himself arrested. It happened the way I'd warned him it would, which gave me no satisfaction at all, because it swept Lena into it. The FBI and the LAPD scooped up his whole crew at an underground race. Helicopters and roadblocks and the works. Leo, Chloe, and 2 of his men went into a holding cell while the feds tried to nail down that they were the highway hijackers who'd been robbing California blind for years. Lena showed up at my door shaking, the first time I'd seen her in a month, and threw herself into my arms and cried into my chest about her brother. I held her and did the math, because I always do the math, and the math said the FBI had a strong suspicion and 0 hard evidence, which in this country is the exact gap money is built to fill. I told her not to panic. Leo wouldn't confess. His men wouldn't confess, because they all knew a confession bought them 7 years minimum. What they needed was a lawyer mean enough to turn the whole thing into a bail hearing over illegal racing and nothing worse. Watching me lay it out calm and fast, this handsome Chinese kid who suddenly sounded like he'd done this before, did more to warm Lena back toward me than any dinner ever had. Nothing rekindles a girl's feelings quite like competently diffusing her family crisis. The catch was cost. Top lawyer, 4 defendants, bail on each. And Lena, God bless her, produced a bank card and told me she had over $300,000. Turns out Leo had been handing his little sister allowance money for years, and while every other girl her age burned it on bags and makeup, Lena had quietly banked almost all of it and told no one. So I took her money and hired Scott Lyman, the sleaziest and most effective attorney in Los Angeles, a man who'd talked a murderer onto the street and never once met a law he couldn't bend for the right envelope. Within a day, the whole crew walked out on bail. Illegal racing and vehicle modification was all the state could make stick. The hijacking charge had no evidence behind it, only a Fed certainty, and certainty doesn't cash. Leo walked out of that police station a changed man about me. Somewhere between the warning, the photos of Ryan, and the bail, the bald mountain had decided his little sister could do worse than the mechanic who kept saving his life. So when he pulled me aside, he made me an offer. He had one last load of stolen goods, a container in the port he couldn't move because the feds were on him, and a buyer in Boston. Move it for him, off the books, and take 15%. $600,000. No capital, no risk, for a man who happened to own a private hole in reality large enough to swallow a shipping container whole. So I walked into the busiest port in the United States, found the container, put my bare hand on it, and thought, store. 40 tons of stolen goods, gone. I flew to Boston with a duffel of clean clothes and a container in my imaginary luggage, and no customs officer on earth had a form for that. Boston is where the second script found me, and it found me through a taxi driver. I asked for a hotel with atmosphere. The driver, a chatty man who'd narrated the entire history of Boston to my silence, got a certain gleam and recommended a place called Moscow Nights, and if I wanted to experience the warmth of the local women, well, he happened to have a card. I took the card because I was curious, and I've learned that in this world, curiosity is how the plot gets its hooks in you. The moment I walked into the lobby, I clocked it. Russian signage in neon, Russian staff, 2 slabs of muscle at the door in suits that cost more than the rooms. My physical stats had crossed twice the human baseline by then, and that upgrade came with senses sharp enough to hear the faint whine of a camera motor behind the ceiling molding of my room and pick out 3 separate listening devices from across the floor. A hotel does not bug its own guests. This was a front, and behind the front sat the ugliest business human beings run. I confirmed it the first night. I got bored, used a hacking tool I'd wheedled out of Kevin back in Los Angeles, and quietly lifted the speed cap the hotel had throttled my room's internet to. Within minutes, their technician hacked me back, took control of my laptop, and the front desk called to apologize and offer as compensation their VIP amenities. Then 2 large men in suits walked 2 young women into my room, one of them dragged in by the arm, and I understood exactly what Moscow Nights was, and exactly who ran it. Russian mob. The kind that gets its start in a gulag and its money in the sale of human beings. I played the satisfied guest and filed the whole place under unfinished business, because I don't start wars I'm not yet strong enough to win. But I marked it. Some businesses shouldn't be allowed to keep their lights on, and I intended to come back and turn theirs off. But that first day, before any of that, I did the job. I dropped the container at an inland dock, handed the goods to a crew of Dominican immigrants who counted them, paid, and vanished, and I sent Leo his confirmation. $600,000 landed in a bank account I'd empty within the day, because the IRS is scarier than any gangster on earth, never sleeps, and can reconstruct your entire spending history from a single receipt. That should have been the whole trip. Then I stopped at a family diner for a burger, and a girl was sitting at the counter picking at a donut. 16 years old, purple wig, too much makeup, a bruise she'd tried to cover, wearing the kind of clothes no 16-year-old chooses for herself. I recognized her, the way I now recognized everyone, from a movie I couldn't stop turning over all through my meal. Her name was Holly, and the Russian gang behind Moscow Nights owned her the way you own furniture. Bought as a child, from men who'd broken into a home and murdered her mother and blindfolded her and sold her off a stage like a lamp. Kept ever since as a product, rented to the kind of powerful men this country grows in abundance and never quite prosecutes. 2 tables over sat a big, quiet black man reading a book with the stillness of someone who used to be very dangerous and was trying to stop. In the story, that man would eventually burn this whole gang to the ground on Holly's behalf. He just hadn't started yet. I looked at the kid at the counter, and for once in my calculating life, my little accountant of a brain did not run a single number. Some things you do because a child shouldn't have to wait for a movie to save her. I told her to get in my car and I'd take her out of the city. She looked at me the way you'd look at one more predator with one more pitch, because that was the only kind of man she had ever met, and she told me to go to Moscow Nights and pay $3,000 like everyone else. She didn't come. So I wrote a phone number on a slip of paper, told her I'd be at that diner the same time every evening, that I was leaving Boston in 3 days. Then I tucked the paper into her little handbag and walked away, because it had to be her choice. Hope is the hardest thing in the world to relight once someone's spent years stamping it out. And you can't force it back into a person. You can only leave the door open and wait. While I waited, I did the thing I'd flown across a country to do. I found an empty warehouse by the docks, took out the first Worthington 1000, and put my new level 5 lockpicking to work. First lock, the custom key. I cut a blank to match the pin depths in under 2 minutes and turned it. First layer, open. Second lock, the mechanical dial. I put a stethoscope to the alloy and listened to the gears whisper their combination. 3 minutes, done. Third lock, the digital keypad with iris verification, the one that would seal the safe into a solid ton of dead metal at the first wrong guess and phone the manufacturer with my photograph. So I didn't guess. I pried up the keypad panel with a surgeon's patience, found the wires under it, cut the sensor that watched for tampering, then keyed and dialed and entered the code I'd already read off the wear on 4 buttons. The safe side open, and the warehouse filled with gold light. 182 bricks in the first safe. Standard 400-ounce bars, 12.5 kilos each, stamped with a Parisian dancer, worth over 150 grand apiece at that year's prices. I counted them into my pocket dimension one at a time, and then I opened safe number 2. 29 more bricks, plus bundled hundreds, plus bearer bonds, plus 6 luxury watches, plus a bag of loose diamonds. 211 gold bars, better than $36 million, and I had done it alone, in a rented warehouse, in the time it takes to watch a movie. The penniless mechanic from 4 months ago was now, quietly, secretly, a millionaire many times over. I bought myself a proper rifle at a Boston gun store, an AR-15 with every accessory the owner could bolt to it, because a man carrying $36 million in stolen gold should probably upgrade from a pistol. And I went back to the diner every evening, as promised. Day 1, no Holly. Day 2, no Holly, just the big quiet man in the corner working through the last chapters of his book. I ate my burger, waited until closing, and rode away thinking maybe she'd never believed me, or worse, believed me and couldn't get out. Day 3 was the last day. I gave her until nearly 8, and I'd already stood up to pay, already decided everyone has their own fate, and I couldn't carry a whole city home in my pocket when I saw her coming down the street, alone, limping, new bruises over the old ones. She'd refused a client, gotten beaten for it, and dragged herself toward the one warm place she knew on the 2 hours of leash they'd given her. I pocketed my cigarettes, walked to the alley, and pulled up beside her on the motorcycle in full delinquent disguise, hair and all, and told her to get on. I'd take her out of here for good. She stared at me. Then she thought of a lifetime of nights, and a stranger who'd waited 3 evenings for a girl who wasn't his problem, and she climbed onto the back without another word. That flicker I'd left burning in her had refused to go all the way out. It never quite does. Then she told me the part that made this hard. They'd put a locator inside her body, surgically, years ago after she ran and failed. And they tracked her phone too, every 5 minutes, her position pinging home. I threw her phone onto a passing river barge to send them chasing the wrong way, then hit the interstate, because a body locator has range, and range is beaten by speed. Except Boston is an old, tangled city. Rush hour boxed us in at 60, while the tracker screamed our position back to a very angry Russian named Sergey. And just as I cleared the metro area, the sky started buzzing. A Cessna, a little 4-seat prop plane, dropping lower and slower, circling us, matching our speed on the highway with a tracker of its own tuned to the beacon in Holly's body. They couldn't catch a motorcycle by road, so they'd caught us by air, and they only needed to keep us pinned until the ground convoy arrived. So I took the plane down. I pulled onto a dark side road, put Holly face down in a ditch, assembled the AR-15, and waited for the Cessna to drop into range in the unlit dark, because they got greedy and flew too low. My first 3 shots at the fuel tank missed, moving target, 100 meters up. Even level 4 shooting has limits. So I stopped being clever and put a dozen rounds through the cockpit glass instead, and the plane shuddered, banked, lost the argument with physics, and cartwheeled into a field several hundred meters off in a ball of fire. Holly stared at the flames like a girl watching the end of the world she'd been trapped in. I told her to get on the bike. We had maybe 15 minutes before the ground team reached the wreck. We rode into the western dark, changed the plate, changed my face, and stopped 160 kilometers away in Springfield, and by then the tracker was out of range, and Sergey was chasing a phone on a barge to nowhere. I got Holly a new identity built on forged birth records, medical insurance, and a private hospital, the kind of quiet paperwork that turns a fake person real in the eyes of the federal government. I took her back to Los Angeles by train, 2 days across the whole country, because she had no passport, and I was not walking a rescued trafficking victim through an airport metal detector. I rented her a clean, safe apartment near Chinatown, 10 minutes from my own, filled her fridge, left her $3,000 for walking around money, and I arranged a real surgeon to cut the locator out of her body so no one could ever ping her position again. She didn't remember much of her life before she was taken. A father, she thought, who might have been a policeman. A little sister, a few years younger. A single night that turned into years of hell. I set Kevin a quiet task, when I still trusted Kevin, to comb old missing child reports for a girl who matched, because I decided to see this one all the way through, and a person deserves to know where they came from. And I made myself a promise, standing in that little apartment watching a 16-year-old sleep somewhere safe for the first time in years, that once my numbers got high enough, I would go back to Boston and do to that Russian gang exactly what the quiet man in the diner had already started doing on his own. Some businesses should not be allowed to keep their lights on. I intended to be the one who flipped the switch. Then I flew home to Los Angeles, $36 million richer, 1 child freed, and walked into my apartment to discover that while I'd been gone, the FBI had been decorating 1 camera, 4 listening devices, sewn into my couch, taped under my fridge, tucked in the kitchen cabinet, hidden beneath my bed. Somebody with real training had turned my apartment into a fishbowl while I was in Boston, and it did not take a genius to guess who. I'd bailed out Leo, I was dating a hijacker's sister, and the FBI wanted a crack in the crew. I was the crack. Here's the thing you have to understand about being watched by the FBI. They had nothing on me. The container was smoke sold in the world's biggest smuggling market. The gold was in a dimension physics doesn't cover, and on paper, I was an 18-year-old with no record who occasionally modified cars for cash. They could suspect me all day. Suspicion doesn't convict a man in a country where money buys lawyers. So I didn't rip out their bugs and tip my hand. I lived my life in the fishbowl, cheerfully, and I planned. Because I had noticed something about my apartment building. Down the hall lived Beatrice, the 12-year-old with the cigarettes, and Beatrice's father David was a small-time crook who had, in the movie version and apparently in this one too, agreed to hide 10 kilos of drugs for a man named Harrison. And Harrison was a senior DEA agent who was, in his spare time, one of the biggest drug lords in Los Angeles. A crooked cop with $100 million in blood money and a temper that got worse every time he sampled the product. The perfect scapegoat, in other words. A man the FBI would love to catch, sitting 1 apartment away from me, so tangled in his own crimes that once the spotlight swung his direction, he'd never claw his way back into the shadows. All I had to do was point the light at him instead of me, and let his own paranoia and my neighbor's greed do the rest. My plan had 2 moving parts, and I set them both with a slip of paper. Part 1. I fed David a note. Idiot, you're being watched. There's a camera at the entrance. Go tell the owner of that shipment. David, being a greedy fool, did not calmly warn Harrison. He read that his apartment was under surveillance, decided Harrison had gotten sloppy and exposed him, and stole the drugs for himself while he still could, planning to fake a burglary. Exactly what a greedy fool does. Part 2. I mailed the FBI an anonymous tip that a man in that building was hiding a large quantity of narcotics. Then I got out of the way and let 2 paranoid killers collide. Harrison moved fast and mean, foregoing because Harrison was coming apart. A decade of skimming his own agency's product had made him rich and made him an addict, and the addict had eaten the careful cop alive. The man who used to solve problems with a bribe and a smile now solved them with a body, and he'd stopped being able to tell the difference between smart and loud. He confirmed the FBI was renting the 4th floor, watching the building. A careful man would have gone quiet and waited out the storm. Harrison decided to make a statement instead. He called in a favor from a Mexican gang he supplied, and they staged a home invasion, kicked in the 4th floor door, shot the FBI agent stationed there 5 times, then robbed 2 more units for cover and vanished vanished. One dead federal agent in a building I lived in on the very day I'd anonymously tipped the FBI about that same building. The dominoes were going over exactly where I'd set them, faster and harder than I dared hope, and all I'd spent was one slip of paper and one stamp. I saved the one person I actually cared about first. Emily, Beatrice's stepmother, my very warm and very married neighbor, I'd sent to a seaside hotel days earlier with a designer handbag and a story, well out of the blast radius. I had no obligation to the rest of David's family, and I want to be honest about the man I'd become by then, because the movie protects Beatrice, and I didn't plan to. She wasn't my problem. That night, high on his own supply, Harrison led men into the building and shot David, his eldest daughter, and his son. But Beatrice had gone out for groceries, and when she came back up the stairs and saw the strangers in the hall and heard the cursing through her own front door, the clever little thing did not go home. She walked straight to my apartment and knocked. And I looked at the girl the movie had promised to save, sighed, and let her in, because saving one member of that family is the same effort as saving two, and I'd already saved Emily. I fed her, I called the FBI agents who'd questioned me earlier and reported an armed break-in in progress, and I kept a 12-year-old alive out of pure logistical convenience, which is the closest I get to virtue these days. The FBI came, found 3 bodies, and a story that led straight to Harrison, and I moved out of that cursed apartment openly, on the record, the very day I'd reported the whole thing. From the outside, I was a witness, a helpful, cooperative, unlucky witness. Then I went to Harrison's house, because a man doesn't earn $100 million as a crooked cop and keep none of it, and I'd already tasted stolen money and found it delicious. His villa was a Cold War brick fortress in the old part of town, and while he was at work, I climbed the wall, poured myself through a second-floor window, and started searching. The attic gave up crate after crate of DEA-marked weapons and equipment, sniper rifles, flashbangs, body armor, all skimmed off the top of his own agency's evidence, and it all went into my pocket. But the man was too rich for one attic to hold, so I kept knocking on walls until the stone under the staircase rang hollow. Behind it, a small door. Behind that, a set of stairs going down into a Cold War fallout shelter that Harrison had converted into a treasure vault. Finding the shelter was its own little hunt, and I'll admit I enjoyed it. The whole ground floor was blanketed in cameras, 3 of 6 aimed at the living room alone, which told me the living room was hiding something. I put on the bandit mask because if I was going to be filmed, I'd rather be filmed as a phantom, and I started knocking on walls. Every wall answered solid until the stone under the staircase answered hollow. I felt along it until a brick gave under my fingers with a soft mechanical click, and a slab of false wall rolled aside to show a narrow door, and behind the door, a straight ladder dropping 5 meters into the dark and the smell of old brandy and older concrete. A Cold War fallout shelter, built by the villa's original owner to survive a nuclear war, converted by Harrison into the safe deposit box of a small crime empire. The alarm went off the second I turned on the lights down there, which was how I knew, finally, that I'd found the real room. I worked fast, because a phone somewhere was already dialing Harrison's pocket. More DEA crates against one wall. 7 oak barrels of aged brandy, 2 of them older than I was. Alloy cases that popped open under my picks to show gold coins, then small gold bars, 100-gram and 500-gram ingots, far easier to sell in 1s and 2s than the Great Parisian Dancer bricks I'd taken from Greg. A case of jewelry, 20 luxury watches, some worth more than a house, and then the travel bags, 15 of them, slumped in a corner, and I unzipped one and found it packed solid with banded hundreds, $3 million a bag, $45 million in cash, sitting in a corner like a pile of dirty laundry a rich man couldn't be bothered to sort. A locked desk gave up the best haul of all, ledgers in Harrison's own hand of every bribe he'd paid and every deal he'd run, discs of evidence, and 4 thick craft envelopes of bearer bonds worth over $400 million, because a crooked cop who wants to hide a fortune hides it in the one instrument on Earth that carries no name. I emptied the whole shelter into my pocket dimension and left with better than $100 million and a paper trail that would put Harrison in prison until the heat death of the universe. Then I mailed the ledgers and the discs straight to the FBI, dropped off by a fake FedEx courier at the field office door, and called Harrison on a burner to whisper that the feds had his number and he should take care of himself. I'd spent 10 days being watched by these people. I was in the mood to redistribute misery. And then, because I am not a moderate man, I threw a match on the whole city. That night, I went to work with a sniper rifle, and I want to be clear that this was not passion. This was engineering. I needed the whole city too busy and too frightened to think about me, and the cleanest way to make 100 investigators forget your name is to hand them 100 new corpses. Over the previous week, I'd done my homework. I'd tailed a handful of the FBI agents who'd been watching me and noted their addresses. I'd read Harrison's own ledger and pulled the names of the DEA brass he'd bought. Now I spent the night collecting on all of it. One shot through one window, then 20 minutes of riding, then another, moving across Los Angeles on a repainted motorcycle behind a repainted face, changing the plate in alleys between kills. 5 FBI agents in their beds. The head of the LA Narcotics Bureau, the exact man who had once tried to investigate Harrison and been paid to stop, dead in a way that would make every colleague assume Harrison had finally silenced him. A crooked detective who'd taken the man's bribes for years. Each body another arrow pointing at a drug lord who was already running. Then, to salt the whole dish, I went loud. A Mexican gang leader from Harrison's supply chain kept court on the top floor of an apartment building. I dropped a hand grenade past 2 guards in the stairwell, kicked in the blast-softened door, and put 3 rounds into the man in the bed while 2 terrified women screamed for lives I would never touch. His men came up the stairs. I rolled another grenade down to meet them. Then I rappelled off the roof through a storm of submachine gun fire, caught a windowsill on the way down to kill my speed, and vanished into the last dark before dawn with the whole building howling behind me. By sunrise, Los Angeles was a house on fire, and everybody inside it was blaming the neighbors. The FBI evidence room had been bombed, wiping out cases and any physical thread that pointed near me. Federal agents were dead in their beds. A narcotics chief and a crooked detective were dead. A city councilman and a government official were dead. And the papers had Harrison's name, his ledgers, his crimes. A wanted drug lord who'd murdered his own colleagues to keep his secret. Or so it looked. So it was built to look. The FBI blamed the DEA. The DEA blamed the FBI. The LAPD felt used by both and dragged its feet on all of it. 3 agencies pointing guns across a table at each other and at a fugitive. And not one of them had a single spare hour for the polite 18-year-old Chinese kid who'd cooperated so nicely with every investigation. Airtight girlfriend alibi, no record, no motive anyone could name. They hauled me in and questioned me anyway, more than once. And each time I brought my sleazy lawyer and left through the front door, restricted from leaving California and otherwise free as a bird. I slept like a baby. It is genuinely amazing what a man can get away with when he arranges for everyone to be staring at maximum intensity at the wrong person. Harrison ran. The papers spent days on him. Senior DEA agent turned drug lord, wanted nationwide, vanished. My frame job had worked so completely that the actual criminal took the fall for crimes he never committed, and the man he framed walked free with the loot. I have read a lot of stories, and I'm not sure I've ever seen a cleaner one. Leo didn't get so lucky, and finding that out gutted me a little because it meant losing Lena. I went by his house to see her and found FBI seals across the door. Her coffee shop, closed and re-rented. The whole crew, gone, fled the country days before, which finally explained why the feds had wired my apartment the moment I got back from Boston. Somebody had cracked and named names, and the names had led back through me. I stood in front of that sealed door and understood that the first woman I'd known in this life had run for a Caribbean island with her brother, and I hadn't even gotten to say a word. When I visited old Thompson's shuttered garage, he told me the rest, quietly, glancing over his shoulder the whole time because the feds had been through his shop too. Tony and Spike, the 2 men I'd put in the hospital, had been visited by the FBI in their beds. And Spike, who'd never grown up with Leo the way Tony had, who had a wife and kids and a broken leg courtesy of me, had taken the deal. He'd rolled on Leo to save his own skin, and out of spite over Lena and his shattered bones, he'd rolled on me too, whatever he could invent. The reason Leo fled, the reason my apartment was full of federal microphones. One frightened man with a grudge, trading his family for a lighter sentence. Spike, the one who'd sworn to break my arms and legs, was a drug addict living quietly at home now that his usefulness to the feds had run out. So one night I climbed the wall, slipped through his open window, drew a syringe I'd loaded with a lethal overdose of the very drug he loved, and slid the needle into a vein while he slept. He never woke. The coroner would call it an accidental overdose, which is a poetic way to die for a man who ratted out his family for a plea deal. I felt nothing. Somewhere along the way, in this country that was never mine, my sense of good and evil had gone very quiet, and I'd stopped waiting for it to come back. I had money now, more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I bought a farm out in Pomona to settle Holly and Emily somewhere safe. I moved my women out of the blast zone, and I told myself the storm had passed. The storm had not passed. The storm had just changed genres. I was sketching on a street corner when the first ghost from the next movie found me. I'd picked up drawing to grind another skill and to give the FBI a nice, boring picture of my day, and I was good at it now. Good enough that strangers tried to buy my street sketches. A tall woman in her 20s stopped to watch. Brown-skinned, striking, and she watched too carefully. She was checking whether I'd accidentally drawn her face into my picture, and I had, in one corner, without noticing, because my hands know things my brain doesn't. She was a professional assassin named Sophia, and she left flowers on the men she killed to bait out the drug lord who'd murdered her parents when she was a child. We had, it turned out, a lot in common, and that was the strange part. Dead parents, murdered in front of her when she was 12 by a Colombian drug lord her father had crossed. A private war she'd trained more than a decade to fight. A talent for turning grief into a skill, which is the only thing I've ever been genuinely good at. I erased her from the sketch so no future investigation could place her at the scene of whatever she'd come to Los Angeles to do. And she watched me do it, and relaxed by a degree. And then she did the thing careful people do around other careful people. She offered me a drink to see what I'd say. We sat in a bar and traded half-truths, and for 1 hour I wasn't performing anyone, which is rarer for me than you'd think. She left flowers on the men she killed, a specific orchid from her lost hometown. Bait to draw out the one man she wanted, because the world is too big to find a hidden enemy, but a hunted enemy comes to you. She didn't know yet that the man she hunted was being kept alive on a sunny American beach by the CIA, a protected asset in their own drug pipeline, because that is the exact joke this country tells over and over and never stops finding funny. I gave her one of my street paintings, and she looked at it the way she must once have looked at everything before the killing started. And she left me a note and a little cash to protect a struggling artist's pride. And she took one of my apartment keys off the wall on her way out. I let her. Some doors you leave unlocked on purpose, for the people carrying the same weight you are. But the ghost that actually mattered was the one that started leaving notes in my Mustang. And to explain the notes, I have to tell you what Arthur Finch's crew had been doing while I played house. They'd figured out they'd been robbed by a stranger. After the disastrous night at the villa, with Arthur shot to pieces and no gold and no answers, they'd pulled the same security company footage Greg had, wound it back a full month, and found what Greg found. A figure, a man, well disguised, changing clothes, never showing his face, shadowing their surveillance for weeks before the gold ever moved. Arthur Finch, the great planner who prided himself on never being surprised, sat there watching proof that someone had been hunting sparrows right behind him the whole time and got pecked blind by one. He apologized to his crew. His crew forgave him, the way men bound by profit forgive the man who used to make them rich. And then they set the one tool they had left on finding the ghost. That tool was Kevin, the hacker I'd let live. Sarah had lied to protect me, refused to give the crew a name, but she couldn't hide the Ford Mustang registered in Leo's name and then transferred to mine. And Kevin could pull a title record in his sleep. So the notes began. The first one said, "Stay away from that woman." The second one mentioned gold bricks, which narrowed the suspect list to exactly one crew on Earth. The third declared war outright, using my full name, so I'd know they knew. And then, the morning I found a bundle of homemade bomb components sitting in my driver's seat with a note, I stopped debating. They'd threatened my life. They'd threatened to plant a bomb I might one day carry a woman I loved into. So I did the arithmetic I always do, and the answer came back the same as always. Arthur Finch's crew could not be allowed to keep breathing, at least not the dangerous ones. Arthur was still in the hospital, half dead from the night he tried to save Sarah, so the war was really against the two men who could still fight. Jack, the playboy driver, smart and capable and hard to kill. Red Eye, the bomb maker, who could slip an explosive into my life any night he chose. Two loose wires. I decided to cut all three, the wires and the man, in a single night, because momentum is a weapon too. Jack first. I tracked him to an apartment building he owned, a whole floor with glass walls a rich man installs when he assumes no one can reach him at height. I set up on a rooftop 380 meters away, put a Remington through the glass and through Jack's chest while he was very much occupied and not watching the skyline, and moved on before the woman under him finished screaming. Red Eye next, out on his little farm past the edge of the city, too far from any hospital to matter. His dogs heard me at the fence, and he came out to quiet them, squatted down beside them in the porch light, and I put a sniper round through him from 100 meters in the dark. Then I ran for the fence at a speed that surprised even me, north of 50 kilometers an hour, faster than any Olympian, the bomb maker's own dog falling behind me the whole way, and I pulled the motorcycle out of nowhere and was gone before it reached the gate. And Arthur, last, in his private hospital, in a guarded VIP ward, I threw a climbing hook through a fourth-floor bathroom window, changed into a doctor's coat, and walked the halls past a knot of chatting nurses with a friendly nod. Arthur was awake, and Arthur was sharp, even shot to pieces, and he took one look at the doctor with the murder in his eyes and reached for the alarm. Too slow. 3 shots. 2 in the body, 1 in the forehead, and the greatest thief I never got to befriend stopped dreaming. I walked back out past the same nurses, dropped down my rope, and by the time the hospital erupted, I was a mile away. 3 men, 1 night. I let Kevin the hacker live, because a shut-in who can barely kill a chicken is no threat once his crew is gone, and because I genuinely liked the guy. He reported me to the police, which was cute, and the LAPD hauled me in and slid photos of 3 dead thieves across the table. I gave them nothing but a helpful, hesitant confession that Arthur Finch had once hired me to illegally modify some very suspicious cars, which sent the whole investigation chasing an international theft ring instead of me. No evidence, no charges, a stern warning not to leave California, and I walked out the front door. Sarah was harder. She'd been questioned too, and she was smart enough to notice that 2 days before all this, I'd rehearsed lines with her, taught her to tell anyone who asked that her boyfriend was a painter, arranged myself a cover identity out of nowhere. She sat in her apartment with a glass of wine and the dawning horror that the tender, mysterious man she'd fallen for might be a murderer, and when I came home, she almost couldn't get the question out. So I didn't make her. I told her most of the truth, which is my specialty. I showed her the notes from my car, the threats, the bomb. They came for me, I said, and I would never hand you to anyone. And she looked at her father, the safecracker, and her mentor's killer that I'd put down for her, and the man in front of her who cooked her breakfast and killed her enemies with the same steady hands, and she made her choice. She thanked me, not for lying, for not lying. And whatever she saw in my eyes in that moment, she decided she could live beside it, which tells you something about both of us. I thought I'd cleaned up every loose end. Then a bullet came through my windshield. I was getting into the Mustang outside Sarah's building, seatbelt clicked, when the back of my neck screamed danger with a clarity I'd never felt before. That specific chill of a gun already aimed at your skull. I tore the seatbelt off with everything I had and threw myself sideways, and a sniper round punched through the windshield and through the exact patch of driver's seat where my chest had been a half-second earlier. 40-degree angle, 370 meters, a rooftop I could name. Whoever it was tried again on a decoy helmet I raised over the car, punched a hole clean through it, and then, professional to the end, packed up and vanished before the neighbors could dial 911. A sniper. A real one, patient and precise, with principles too, because she'd aimed at me and not the fuel tank that would have taken the whole parking lot. I had no idea who I'd angered this time. I ran the list and came up empty, and the not knowing was worse than any threat, because you can't counter a ghost. She stayed a ghost for 3 days while I lived loud in the open, hoping she'd try again, grinding skills to burn off the tension. Then on the 4th day, she walked right up to me on the beach in a black bikini and asked if we could get to know each other, because of course the world's top assassin's invincible last resort is her own face. Her name was Alice, and if you've seen a certain movie about a married pair of killers, you know exactly how much of her name to trust. Here's who she was, the part I pieced together after. Raised by a special forces father after her parents split. Taught to shoot before she finished high school, blooded on mercenary contracts as a teenager. When her father died on a job, she walked out of the mercenary life and into an assassin's guild, and there she stayed. Over a decade as their ace, tens of millions in profit a year. A perfect record. Never once a failed contract. She'd been hired by the private hospital I'd bloodied, the one whose rich and famous patients had all fled in terror after I put 3 rounds into a man in their VIP ward, and their intelligence had pointed the guild's best killer straight at me. For 3 days, she'd hunted me and failed, because every time she lined up a shot, my danger sense yanked me out of the crosshairs, and every time she got close on foot, both our instincts started screaming at once. 2 apex predators circling a watering hole. So on day 3, with her guild's deadline running out and her spotless record on the line, the great Alice fell back on the one weapon that had never failed her. She taught herself to surf badly, so I'd have every reason to put my hands where a man puts his hands on a woman who's falling off a board. And she smiled her perfect smile and waited for the one clean second to slide a steel needle between my ribs. The trouble was, my instincts kept screaming every time she got close, and hers kept screaming back. 2 apex predators pretending to flirt on a beach, each of us waiting for the other to blink. I let her lead me to a hotel room because I wanted this over somewhere private. The second I turned my back toward the bathroom, the chill hit me, and I spun into a back kick that met her exactly as she drew her pistol, and the gun spun off into the corner while her whole arm went numb. Then it was just the 2 of us, and it was not close. 12 years of training and the reflexes of a killer, against a man with every physical attribute at triple the human maximum. She was fast. I was faster. I caught her wrist out of the air, then I took her apart, piece by furious piece. The second gun off her thigh, the dagger out of her stocking, the wire from her bracelet. She cursed me in 3 languages the whole time, and when she headbutted my nose hard enough to bring tears to my eyes, I stopped being gentle about it. In the morning I got dressed, left the handcuff key on the nightstand where she was pretending to sleep, and told her the truth as I understood it. I don't care who you are or who hired you. You tried to kill me twice. I dealt with you twice, so we're even. Come back if you want. Whether you survive the next time is a different question. Then I walked out, and a few minutes later, alone in that room, the ace assassin of an organization that had never lost a contract opened her eyes and understood, for the first time in her career, what it felt like to fail. She wouldn't leave it there. I knew that. In her story, her own organization would eventually turn on her for the failure, and either way, an assassin's guild that had marked my name was not going to shrug and move on. This wasn't over. It was barely started. So I did what I always do. I turned it into a farm. I bought the place in Pomona, 50 kilometers out, 100 acres of empty woodland with 3 abandoned farms for neighbors and nobody around to hear a thing. I told everyone I was renovating. For a week, I did every job on that farm with my own 2 hands. Clearing brush, digging, framing barns, wiring, building a chicken coop nail by nail. Every hour of honest labor rained skills and stat points on me until my attributes crossed 40 and my private pocket passed 160 cubic meters. 13 new skills in 7 days. But that was never really why I was out there. I could feel them. More than one, watching from the tree line, patient rifles I couldn't quite locate, waiting for me to look tired enough. Sometimes I caught the LAPD's clumsy tails, and sometimes I caught something far better hidden. A presence I couldn't pin down, no matter how hard I reached. And I knew the Assassin's Guild had sent their answer for Alice, or Alice herself, and they were circling my new home with their scopes warm. Good. I'd stopped running to protect the people in my life and started building a place to end this instead. I laid enough weapons and traps into that farm to greet an entire squad, all of it hidden in a pocket only I could open. Then I hammered the last plank into the coop, wiped the sweat off my face, and looked out at the tree line where death was waiting for me to blink. I picked up another board. There was still an hour of daylight left, and the show had to look real. Come and get me. I've been dying for company.